Hello everyone, it's me Uncle John. Today I'm going to read S557, The Call of the Wild, Chapter 6. For the love of a man, John Thornton had been ill in December, and his two friends had had to leave him at White River and go on to Dawson. They left him in the camp with plenty of food and with his two dogs, Skid and Blackie. Now the spring had come and he was almost well. He lay in the sun by the river with Buck, watching the water and listening to birds slowly getting stronger and stronger. A rest is very welcome after running 5,000 kilometers, and Buck slowly got fatter and stronger. It was a peaceful, lazy time for both men and dogs, while they waited for Thornton's friends to return from Dawson. Skid made friends with Buck immediately, and while Buck was still very ill, every morning she washed his cuts carefully with her tongue. Blackie, too, was friendly, and as Buck grew stronger, the three dogs often played games together. Sometimes Thornton joined the games, too. The days passed very happily, and for the first time, Buck learned to love. He had never loved the man before. He and Mr. Miller in the Santa Clara Valley had been very good friends, but Buck hadn't loved him. John Thornton had saved his life, but he was also a man who was naturally a kind animal. He took very good care of his dogs, not because he was sensible to do that, but because he felt they were his children. He was always talking to Buck, holding his head and shaking it lovingly. In answer, Buck liked to take Thornton's hand gently in his mouth. Buck was happy to lie on the ground all day, watch Thornton, and when Thornton spoke to him, what touched him, Buck went wild with happiness. At first, he was afraid that Thornton was going to disappear like Parole and Francois, and at night he sometimes woke up and went to the tent to make sure that he was still there. Something was changing in Buck. He had lived in the north a long time now, and he was almost a wild dog. He was happy to sit by Thornton's fire, but he said as a wild animal, his dreams are filled with the other animal, dogs, half-wolves and wild wolves. They seemed to call him into the forest, and sometimes Buck wanted to leave the fire and answer the call. But every time he went into the trees, his love for Thornton brought him back. It was only Thornton who stopped him going into the forest. Other men did not interest him. Visitors to the camp tried to make friends with him, but Buck stayed cold. When Thornton's two friends, Hans and Pete, arrived from Dawson, Buck refused to notice them at first, but then he saw that they were friends of Thornton's, and after that, he accepted them. But they were not his friends. They were, like Thornton, kind men, and they understood that Buck loved Thornton and him alone. Thornton too understood the Buck one day. Buck and the three men were sitting on some high rocks, 100 meters above the river. Thornton wondered if Buck would obey any order, even a crazy one. "Jump, Buck," he shouted, pointing down to the river. A second later, the three men were holding Buck back as he tried to jump. "That was very strange," said Pete. They had sat down again. "Not strange, wonderful. Terrible, too. Sometimes it frightens me. Yeah, I feel sorry for any man who hits you when Buck is near." "So do I," said Hand. "It happens in the autumn in Circle City. A man called Burton was starting a fight with another man in a bar. Thornton stepped between them to try to stop them. Buck was, as usual, lying in the center corner watching. The Burton hit Thornton, and he nearly fell. Just catching a table, Buck flew through the air. Burton saved his life by putting up his arm and was thrown onto the ground with the Buck on top of him. Buck took his teeth out of the man's arm and this time bit into his throat. Then a crowd of people pulled Buck up. A doctor was called. Everyone agreed that Buck had only attacked because he saw Thornton in danger, and from that day, Buck's name became famous all over the north. Later that year, Buck saved Thornton in a different way. Three men were taking a boat down a fast and rocky river. Thornton was in the boat, while Hans and Pete moved along the riverbank, holding the boat withered. Well, Buck followed them, keeping a worried eye on Thornton. They came to a more dangerous part of the river, and the boat started to go too quickly. Hans pulled on the rope to stop it, pulled too hard. The boat turned over, and Thornton was thrown into the water and carried downriver towards rocks where no swimmer could live. Buck jumped in immediately and swam 300 meters until he reached Thornton. Then he turned. With Thornton holding his tail, Buck swam toward the riverbank. But they moved slowly, and all the time the river was carrying them toward the place where the water crashed 20 meters down onto rocks. Thornton knew that they wouldn't get to the bank quickly enough, so he let go of Buck, held on to a rock in the middle of the water, and shouted, "Go, Buck, Buck!" But Buck swam as hard as he could to the bank, and Pete and Hans pulled him out. It was hard for Thornton to hold on to his rock in that wild water. His friends knew they had only a few minutes to save him. They tied their rope around Buck, who had once jumped into the river and tried to swim to Thornton. The first time the water took him past the rock, Pete and Hans had to pull him back. The second time he swam higher up the river, the water brought him down to Thornton. Thornton held on to Buck, and Hans and Pete pulled the rope as hard as they could. Man and dog disappeared under the water, banging into rocks, turning over and over. With Buck on top, sometimes Thornton, when Hans and Pete finally pulled them out, both seemed more dead than alive. But after a while, their eyes opened and life returned. That winter at Dawson, Buck did something that made him even more famous in the North. It was also very helpful to the three men. They wanted to make a journey to look for gold in the East, and they needed money. They were in a bar one day when some of the men started to talk about dogs. One man said that he had a dog who was strong enough to pull a sledge with 200 kilos on it. Another said his dog could pull 250. A third man called. Matheson said his dog could pull 300 kilos. That's nothing, said Thornton. Buck can pull 350. Can he break the sledge out when it's frozen to the ice and then started moving? And pull it 100 meters? He can break it out and start it and pull it 100 meters. Said Matheson, speak slowly now. I've got $1,000 here, and I said he can. As he spoke, he took a bag of gold and put it down on the table. He knew Buck was strong, but was he strong enough? 10 meters, whoa. 10 men were watching him and waiting. He didn't have $1,000, and neither did Hans or Pete. I've got a sledge outside with 350 kilos on it, said Matheson. So it's if you want to try. Didn't know what to say. He looked at the other men in the bar. One of them was an old friend, Jim O'Brien. Can you lend me $1,000, Jim, he asked. Sure, but I don't think the dog can do it, John. Everybody went out into the street. There were 200 or 300 men around Matheson's sledge. The sledge had been outside the bar for 2 hours and was frozen to the ice, in a temperature of 50 degrees below zero. Most of the men thought the bug was not strong enough, and Matheson smiled happily. Shall we make it $2,000? He asked. Thornton, Hans, and Pete talked for a minute. They had only $400. But they added this to O'Brien's 1,000. Matheson, very sure of winning, also put down another $400. Matheson's 10 dogs were taken away. And Buck, who could feel the excitement in the air, was harnessed to the sledge. Buck was, without question, a very fine animal. Bright-eyed, intelligent, his thick coat shining with health. He looked as strong as a horse. One man went up to Thornton. I'll buy him now. He said, I'll give you $800 for him. Thornton shook his head, sat down on the snow. Next to Buck, he held Buck's head in his hand and spoke softly. If you love me, Buck, if you love me. But took Thornton's hand between his teeth and let go. Stood up and stepped back. Ready, Buck, he said. Buck pulled on his harness a little. Getting ready. Right, cried Thornton. Pulled to the right horse, stopped suddenly, and his eyes under the sledge began to break. Now left, called Thornton. Buck pulled to the left, breaking more of the ice. Now pull. Buck threw himself against his harness and pulled. He held his body low to the ground, his head down, and forward his feet dug into the hard snow. Harder and harder he pulled. Suddenly the sledge moved a centimeter, 2, 3, and little by little started to go forward across the snow. A little faster, Thornton ran behind, calling to Buck as he pulled the sledge towards the end of the 100 meters. The watching men were shouting and throwing their hats in the air. Buck had won. Thornton was on the snow next to Buck again, talking to him, and Buck had Thornton's hands in his teeth. The end.